to do an introduction to you both in just a minute. But I'm Debbie Rosen. I'm the founder and one of the two owners of the Study Pro, and Lindsay Toms is somewhere in the background here. And we would both like to welcome you to our webinar series. I just wanted to share, if you have never seen the Study Pro, this is what it looks like. If I turn my computer around, you'd see basically what was in this picture, which I just did for Dr. Brianna and Dr. Erickson. So, Fredriksen, sorry. And so, but what we do is we help students to build the skills that make their life and their work at school easier. And so we do this in a number of ways that you see here at the bottom. We do that throughout the school year. We do it in the summer, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want to also share is just some of our upcoming events. We do study skills courses. It's really important for us to ensure that students have a system and have skills that they feel make school easier for them. It's not just about sharing all these skills verbatim. It's really about exploring how to make some of these areas easier for them and feel that they have the ability to do things like take notes that they maybe haven't learned before. We offer these courses from fourth grade and through college and entry to college in the summer. But for now, we're starting a new course set of a cycle, which is 5 weeks, starting this Sunday. And so you can sign up using our website or this QR code. We also have a workshop that we teach on how to improve executive functions through AI. And this is what you see here in the portal that all the students use. And so we actually interface with the AI, and we think we know all what we've heard from students about the hardest areas, the things that are the greatest barriers for them, whether it's starting work, understanding material, preparing. And we think there's very ethical and useful ways that AI can play a key role in making this easier. We're actually speaking about that in Montgomery County Public Schools next week. And we also are doing a free workshop on some of the hardest part of writing for high school. We just did our middle school one. It's very successful. And so that's going to be on March 7th. So if you have a student that does get stuck getting thoughts from their head to the paper, or tends to open up a document and go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this, this is a great opportunity to learn some real specific strategies. We also train professionals. And so we have a series, we have the last two in our series for professional dates. Again, helping decode what behavior is versus where a missing skill is. So we know kids have the goals of being successful. If their behavior isn't showing that, then what's the missing skill? And so we talk a lot about that to make the lives of teachers and administrators easier. And finally, we are speaking, I think maybe second finally, we're speaking at Fairfax County Public School Resource Center on this topic coming up March 11th. And we do all of this stuff over the summer as well. So our summer schedule is now up. If you go to our homepage, you'll see that. And so with that, I guess that is the final piece. Oh, the second final piece, we do have upcoming webinars. Sorry. And so if you are here, then you'll be getting an invitation to these upcoming webinars that we're excited to present and continue to expose all these incredible set of knowledge that our current presenters are going to share with us today. And so with that, I want to more formally welcome a very, very important partner for the Study Pro, which is the Stixrud Group. And Dr. Fredriksen and Dr. Brander here. And what's so extraordinary about what they bring to the table is, as they had said earlier, if you were here, is that they really have this developmental span from pediatric, which is all the way through college, and then all the way through adulthood, and really understanding how to see ADHD, not just as a childhood label, but a lifespan story, and one that evolves as the brain develops. And so we're really here to answer that question. How does the brain develop, and how does the label or the challenges of ADHD really evolve with that? And so I know that we couldn't ask for better guides for this conversation. And this team, as they had said, but I want to say, has an extraordinary set of professionals on it. And two of them, of course, are here. And we value greatly the reports that you guys provide in the work that we do. And we love working with you all. And of course, you have extraordinary credentials, and that's up here. But with that, I'm going to stop my share. And I'll let you, Dr. Brand, share. Oh, no, sorry, Dr. Fredriksen, share your screen. I also want to say that this is being recorded and that please put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. And so I'll be able to share all of those questions at the end. But we will have time for questions at the end, and we are recording this. So with that, I'll turn things over and welcome you again.
Thanks so much for having us and for those really kind words about our group. We also appreciate this bi-directional relationship. So thank you for having us. I'm just setting a timer so that I don't impinge on Jesse's time, since we're doing two sort of separate bits here. Since he is the adult expert and I'm the one who works with the kids, we thought we'd go chronologically, right? So, um, so, just to define terms, always important because we're all coming at this from different levels of experience and background, etc. So, always important to just define what we're talking about, right? So, we're all on the same page. We, you all, everybody hears the term executive functioning, and it sort of sounds a bit mysterious. What it is essentially the skills that we need to use to reach a goal. Could be something as simple as folding laundry, buying groceries, etc. Could be something as complex as doing our taxes, writing the said paper you were saying, where you teach the high schoolers how to get started on their writing, right, at your group. And so the skills we bring to bear include we have to stay focused on what we're doing. So say, let's like make this concrete. You're at the grocery store. You have to stay focused on the task at hand. You're not chitty-chatting with your neighbor who you ran into in the produce section, right? Your working memory, you have to sort of remember what you're doing as you navigate around the grocery store. And you know the thing where you walk down the aisle and, oh, what did I come here for? That sort of thing, right? You have to inhibit your impulses when you're passing like the cookies and all that. You have to have a plan. You have to have your list, right? If you go there without your list, odds are you're going to forget some critical thing you needed. You have to have some organization. You have to have an approach. Like, I'm not going to get my milk and then my cucumbers and then my like cream cheese and then right you have to compartmentalize and have strategy. You have to think flexibly. I my recipe calls for X type of fruit, but they don't have that particular variety. So can I supplement or not supplement? Can I substitute something else? And you have to sort of monitor the quality of your performance, how you're presenting yourself to others, etc. So these are some of the core executive skills that we are always using on a day-to-day basis in a variety of tasks, and they develop across the course of our youth. And each time I feel like they look at this, they're saying it's completed later in life. So this is associated with the development of the frontal lobe, which we know is developing well through our late 20s, if not further. And so you can sort of see here in this illustration how it tracks across time. Okay. So there are surges at certain times, which map onto changes in sort of our academic progress. So there are surges in development around sort of kindergarten aged, sort of mid to late elementary school, and the transition to post-secondary. And executive functioning development is influenced by a number of things. The whole nature nurture, both of the above, right? So the in regard to the nurture, the sorts of relationships that children have access to with their key trusted people and loved ones, right? The sorts of ways in which we interact with children and support their creativity and their ability to practice skills. And the things we don't do. So in other words, the protecting them from stress, ensuring that they get adequate sort of sleep, exercise, etc. And I don't mean stress in general, but a more toxic sort of chronic level of stress. We all obviously experience situational stress, and that's typical and good for us. And then genetically, right? So the nature component as well. Excuse me. And so the one of the things we think of when we think of sort of the more nature component is ADHD is associated with executive functioning vulnerability, which we'll talk about in more specific detail. Dr. Russell Barkley is a well-known researcher in the field of ADHD, and he has obviously all these things are approximate rules of thumb, right? But this idea that kids who are developing with ADHD have a 30% delay in their executive functioning capacity, and so You might have a 16-year-old who's looking more like a middle schooler in regard to their executive functioning skills, not necessarily other areas of functioning. So what is ADHD? Just briefly here, to be sure that we're all on the same page again in regard to definition of terms, we're looking at three core traits: difficulty sustaining attention, difficulty inhibiting impulses, difficulty regulating one's activity level. There are three subtypes. So the rule of threes is like in fairy tales. There's always three, right? There are three subtypes. There's a predominantly inattentive presentation for our primarily sort of, daydreamy and attentive out to lunch. There's predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation where the behaviors are the most notable component, and there's a combined presentation. So the inattentive and the combined are the most common. You need to see the difficulties in multiple environments. If it's just in one environment, it might be something to do with the environment and not the person, right? So it needs to be a more sort of universal type thing. ADHD runs in families. Kids are 6 to 8 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD if they have a parent with ADHD. There's two important things, I think. One is we're not talking about, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? But that deficit word is really misleading because we're talking about a dysregulation of attention, not an inability to attend, right? So people with ADHD are often fantastic at staying focused when it's something that they find stimulating. But if it's something that feels dull, it feels overly challenging, it feels stressful, then it's much more difficult to implement those same skills. And the second interesting thing is that though not part of the diagnostic criteria, there's frequently an emotional regulation component as well, which we'll talk about. So, two sides to every coin, right? There are many strengths associated with ADHD, many, entrepreneurs, politicians, athletes, all kinds of people have talked about how their ADHD has really fueled their progress. And part of it tracks back to that whole dysregulated attention, such that, again, people with ADHD are great at staying focused when it's something they're passionate about. And so that can really be parlayed into a lot of positive things. We see higher rates of creative thinking, again, sort of potentially moving down that entrepreneurship type ability path. So willingness to take risks, resilience, spontaneity, energy. So all of these, two sides to every coin, right? So common misconceptions that we encounter in our office. Um, Again, dysregulation, not deficit. So some parents have a hard time, understandably, wrapping their heads around the fact that why is it my kid can spend hours building with Legos, but not so much when it's time for homework, right? Um, Sometimes we hear what I refer to as the L word, which is lazy. And I mean, I don't think kids are ever really lazy. There's something that's making them present that way, right? So kids with ADHD can have a harder time initiating tasks. Again, if it's not something motivating to them, and that can appear as laziness, but that's not where we would see it as actually arising from. Some people, we all have to be careful not to judge other people's parenting. So, when the kid's having the meltdown in the grocery store, and you have to you have to show empathy for that parent, not sort of be judgmental of their parenting, right? And so there are times when people, oh, well, if the parents were stricter or if they did X, Y, Z. So certainly there are parenting strategies that can help, but it doesn't create ADHD. And then just this idea of, oh, well, he or she, they're just going to grow out of it. Actually, as you'll previewing here, as you'll learn from Jesse's portion of the talk, these things persist in adulthood. They just may look different. Another misconception is, oh, ADHD is a boy thing. Guess what? It's not. So, like many things, psychiatric, developmental, medical, early research primarily done on men and not only men, but white men, right? And then just this, oh, well, if it's true for them, it must be true for all the rest of us, right? And so we've seen how that's been disproven in regard to cardiovascular health, just all kinds of things. So, early diagnostic criteria for ADHD really emphasized the hyperactive impulsive elements, which are on average more evident in boys than in girls. And so for many years, girls were missed, and we're starting to be much more diligent about that because girls are, again, on average, not always, but on average, more likely to present with that more inattentive type, which is harder to see in the context of a larger classroom setting. And girls are often better able to mask, and we often see misdiagnosis because the attention symptoms produce anxiety, and people see the anxiety, but they don't necessarily see what underlies the anxiety. So, executive functioning and ADHD cross over. Um, there are two of them are even mentioned directly. I mean, inhibiting impulses, sustaining attention are directly mentioned in the ADHD diagnostic criteria. But there are lots of other things we very routinely see. Um, so anybody who has ADHD in their house, as I do, will sort of be like, bing, 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 yes. So following multi-step instructions is a challenge when you are easily distracted, right? Navigating daily routines, even though they are daily routines that parents may feel a child should is a not a useful word, by the way, because when we feel that something should be a certain way, we may have an unrealistic expectation, but so parents may feel that a child should be able to navigate this daily routine independently because we do it every day. But again, you can easily get thrown off when you have ADHD. You can get thrown off track. A lot of lost water bottles, the whole we have to buy this kid 5 coats every winter kind of scenario, right? Um, the frustrating situation where the kid does their homework and then forgets to hand it in, or it's 8 p.m. and suddenly it's like, oh my, you got this freak out because, well, your child is freaking out because they have some assignment due the next day and they didn't bring home the thing they need to do the assignment. And so all this stress breaks loose. The higher order task demands when it comes to managing your workload and planning your schedule as you advance in school and you have multiple teachers, multiple classes, multiple tests on the same day, multiple assignments due on the same day, and you have to manage all of that and plan it out. Certain academic tasks are especially difficult when you have trouble with planning, organizing, staying focused, etc. Writing, for example, which Debbie mentioned at the beginning. And oftentimes we'll see vulnerability to inattentive mistakes. So just little, you're doing the math and instead of dividing, you multiply, or you carry the number wrong, or you make the little spelling mistake. Sort of these inattentive mistakes are very common as well. So in regard to as we're progressing along our developmental pathway here, let's think a little bit about how things shift in adolescence. So there are so many changes going on in adolescence. There's this psychologist called Erik Erikson who was around in the mid 1900s, which sounds so long ago, but really, like in the 50s and 60s. And he, I guess to kids it is a long time ago, but we'll just like skate over that fact that makes us all feel old. He developed a theory about the developmental phases that people go through and sort of the tasks that they're needing to achieve in that phase in order to healthily move into the next phase. And so the one for adolescents is referred to as identity or role confusion. So kids are looking for, they're testing out different values, different morals, different styles, different friends, just all kinds of things in this period and trying to feel like find what is a fit for them. So there's a lot going on in adolescence. I just did a talk the other day on social media, so that's an interesting one. So most kids in adolescence are being exposed to social media. In fact, the Pew Research Fund does this cool survey every year, and the one from late 2025 showed that almost, I think it was somewhere in the 30s, so almost 40% of the teens that they surveyed reported using certain social media apps, quote unquote, almost constantly. That's the teens' appraisal of the frequency. So I don't know exactly what almost constantly means, but so that's an enormous factor that kids are dealing with. The most common ones were YouTube, TikTok, and Snapchat, and Instagram. Academic demands are clearly increasing. We are seeing a rise in mental health issues, especially among adolescent females when it comes to anxiety, depressed mood. Kids are being exposed to substances and other potentially risky behaviors. They are chronically, many of them, sleep deprived, right? Because they want to go to bed later because that's how their circadian rhythm is shifting. And they have a gosh darn lot of responsibilities that they have to manage, and then they have to get up quite early for school. And then there are the hormones and the puberty. So in regard to that, in regard to the sex hormones, in boys, the changing testosterone levels can increase risk-taking behaviors. Boys are at greater risk for externalizing. That means sort of acting out type behaviors in adolescence, and this is the effects are mitigated by when kids are medicated, which is good news. In girls, the higher levels of estrogen and progesterone can affect the efficacy of medication. And so it's interesting, and so not to like get too far into the weeds, but so you can see real differences in terms of where an adolescent girl is in her cycle, right? Because of the estrogen levels. Okay, so the first 2 weeks you can see is the release of the dopamine and serotonin may support the efficacy of the medication. And the last 2 weeks, so leading into the next cycle, the meds may feel weaker, leading to sort of increasing levels of emotional dysregulation. So these are things to be aware of. And girls overall in general at risk, greater risk for the internalizing issues. So that's the anxiety, self-esteem, depressed mood type stuff. That said, let's not, don't, never fear, don't lose faith. The adolescent brain is very resilient. There are wonderful, wonderful things going on. Social learning systems are developing, executive function systems are developing. They're just, it's so plastic and they're learning so much. So don't lose hope is sort of the take home point there. So what can we do to help? Um, so like I said earlier, there are some parenting strategies. They won't sort of take away ADHD or but they will really, really help, right? And some of them are just they sound very basic, but they can be difficult to implement because we're all so busy. But so these are things to sort of bear in mind. Regular routines promote self-regulation. So when there's regulation around you, your internal regulation tends to function better. So fairly consistent wake up times, bedtimes, meal times, exercise, homework, leisure, etc. Doesn't mean that at 4:05 every single day the exact same thing must happen, but just a sort of a consistent sequence of events is very helpful. Document that visually, right? Visual aids are wonderful for kids with ADHD and executive functioning difficulties. The whiteboard with the weekly schedule, the daily schedule, the monthly schedule, whatever. The whole family calendar so your kid can see where their activities fall in the context of the other things. Mom, why can't you drive me to blah blah? Well, look at the calendar. Like, look at there's a lot going on today, kind of thing, right? Um, Break down tasks. There are a lot of multi-step things we ask our kids to do without really realizing how complicated it might feel to them. Like clean your room. I mean, goodness, how many times were we told that as children? And, but that is super complicated. Like give them a list, right? Pick up Legos, books on a shelf, laundry and hamper, bang, 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 and they go down the list, right? As opposed to this sort of more amorphous demand. Our attitude that we bring to our children is important. Um, Going back to that whole the L word, the lazy word part, I mean, really, I think it's most productive to approach problematic situations with a can't mentality as opposed to a won't mentality. In other words, our child isn't necessarily choosing to do the annoying thing to make us angry, right? Because how is that productive to them? Now, we know that negative attention is still attention, but isn't positive attention like much nicer attention, right? So just there is no, it's not productive for them evolutionarily, to piss off the people who are in charge of keeping them alive, right? And so if that's happening on a consistent basis, let's assume there's a skill deficit there as opposed to a purposeful sort of attempt to be a certain way, right? And so that I think that reframe can help us a lot of times when we're feeling frustrated because it's normal to feel frustrated while parenting, and that can be especially the case when you're managing a child with ADHD. It's important to promote self-advocacy. I have a talk on sort of presenting diagnosis to children. I think that's very important so they know how their brains work and sort of how to speak up for their needs. Um, as you saw earlier, two sides to every coin. There are many strengths associated with ADHD that we can emphasize with our children to boost self-esteem because on average, kids with ADHD are much more likely to receive negative feedback. Stop that, don't do that, why are you blah blah. And so the more we can pile on the positives. And scaffolding. You see my little visual here with the father like sending his child off on the bicycle. We're scaffolding toward independence. We want to be mindful of sleep. I know this is being recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to read through this. I won't go through everything. I've got extra slides in here, so you can look through it later. I don't have time to talk about everything though. So we really want to prioritize sleep insofar as we can. There are certain sort of guidelines that are recommended for different ages. And there are certain sort of core sleep hygiene strategies that can be very helpful. And one of the most important is no screens in the bedroom overnight, right? And then not just removing the screen, but also having parental controls because kids are sneaky as heck and they can get that screen, right? And they can get around the parental control if you don't, right? I read a book. There's a great book, Jean Twenge, who's done a lot of research on this digital sort of effects on kids over the decades. She was relating an anecdote about her kid, her own kid, who got the device and got around the parental controls by setting her time zone for China. So she's up in the middle of the night and her device thinks she's in China, and so it's letting her do all the things she wants to do. And so anyway, kids are sneaky and smart, and so we just have to be extra cautious because they don't know what's good for them necessarily, right? The basic health behaviors, regular physical exercise. This doesn't need to mean travel soccer or whatever. This can be going for a walk. This can be jumping on a trampoline. This can be running around outside. It doesn't, need to be some major sort of structured activity. Time in nature. There's enormous positive, lots of research on that. There's more emerging in the past decade on the gut-brain axis and on how what we eat affects how we function. And then social media and electronics guidelines there are important to maintain as well. Leisure time, so important, so important. You know, the beauty of being bored and all that we read about, so important. Letting kids lean into their areas of passion and interest, because these are the things that will spark internal motivation for them. Internal motivation being different from external motivation, which is me rewarding you for doing the thing that I want you to do. Internal motivation is you working hard to do the thing you're passionate about, and that is clearly the sort of motivation we really want to promote as kids are moving toward independence. Okay. Um, so I'm going to leave this one for you all to look through. I have in here a series of empirically supported homework strategies that I enjoy. Well, I enjoy, you know what I mean, that I like to recommend and that I think are productive. So I'm going to leave this for you to look through as you navigate sort of through the recording and sort of my opinions about, again, empirically supported opinions about what role parents should play in homework. Again, there's no should. Let's just did all kids walk at one time? Did they learn to read? Did they? No, they did not, right? So everybody's on their own path, and we're just working to scaffold and support their progress. There are also a lot of interventions that we can help our children get in place at school, whether it's via a 504 accommodation plan, an IEP, depending on the set of needs and the requests we're making. There are so many things that can make school so much better for kids and teens. Just very simple, simple, simple things that can make an enormous difference. We can also get executive functioning support via Study Pro, for example, potentially. We can get parenting support if we're struggling to implement some of those parenting strategies I mentioned. And medication is a first-tier empirically supported intervention for ADHD that's been in use since the 1960s with children. Lots of long-term research on the safety and efficacy. Critical to talk to your pediatrician about that if your child has ADHD. Um, and I'm just see how I'm segueing toward the adult talk here. See, Jesse, see. Then we can support the launch to college. So, not to be a fearmonger, but students with ADHD are at risk for difficulty in college. Now, mitigating factors. Kids who are doing better emotionally when they launch to college, kids who have learned some good executive functioning skills, kids who have been supported and accommodated appropriately earlier in their lives, and kids who then transition to college with accommodations in place in a proactive way versus acting reactively. We have a spike in referrals at our office in January with kids who have just, there's been some like disaster first semester where they just didn't, this stuff wasn't in place and they were just overwhelmed and bad things happened. And so it's really just better to be, forewarned is forearmed kind of thing. Okay. And that is the end of me. And so I'm going to transition you over to Dr. Brand.
All right. Thanks so much, Katja. I appreciate the excellent segue into adulthood, like a well-oiled machine here. And thank you to the Study Pro for having us here. I'll be talking about ADHD in adulthood, including the ways ADHD can manifest specifically in adulthood, some strategies that people with ADHD can use. I'll take you through some specific issues involved in ADHD in adulthood. They can be quite different, but also similar in many ways from those in children. Just a word about the prevalence of adult ADHD. It seems like the most heavily cited number is about 2.5%. So 2.5% of the population having ADHD, but others cite slightly higher rates. But the number is in the hundreds of millions worldwide, still have that 2-to-1 ratio in terms of gender. One of the most important things that I want you to take away from my talk is just that there is no such thing as adult ADHD. It's all just ADHD. And one of the primary criteria for ADHD is that symptoms are present prior to age 12. So it doesn't matter if you're 13 years old, 64 years old, you theoretically have to show at least some signs in childhood. And also, just because you had ADHD as a child doesn't mean that you meet criteria forever. Around half or more than half of children outgrow their symptoms over time. So experiences in adult ADHD are similar in some ways to those in childhood, of course, including the attentional and executive issues that Katya was going through. That's inherent to the neurotype throughout the lifespan. But there are some experiences that are more relevant to adulthood. For example, the hyperactivity that kids with ADHD experience becomes a sort of internal restlessness in adulthood. So you're not necessarily expecting to see full-grown adults getting out of their seat or acting like they're driven by a motor, as you see in childhood. Although I have seen clients like that who can't seem to sit in their seat. Research shows that adults with ADHD are less likely than their peers to graduate from high school and college. They have lower occupational attainment, more struggles at their job itself, which warrant workplace accommodations in many instances. They're twice as likely as their peers to leave a job voluntarily and significantly more likely to be fired. And these outcomes are largely consistent regardless of gender or medication use. ADHD is also associated with a number of financial challenges, including lower annual income, more reliance on public aid. There is a higher risk of motor vehicle accidents in adults with ADHD. And research also suggests that marital and familial relationships of adults with ADHD are often strained, in part because of difficulty fulfilling their familial obligations. So the stuff you see in school as a kid transfer over to other responsibilities. Adults with ADHD have a more negative perception of their family and marriage compared to their spouses. At the same time, the spouses also seem to have less satisfaction in their marriages. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add that these are based on group data. So for any of you out there with adult ADHD starting to get nervous about car accidents, job loss, that can't be predicted in a single individual alone. But it is worth mentioning. As Katya mentioned, these things travel into adulthood. There are substantial strengths seen in adult ADHD that are less common than in their typically developing peers. ADHD is associated with a generation of big ideas, entrepreneurship, saying yes to things, which of course can be a major advantage. People with ADHD describe a sense that they're a big picture person that kind of leaves the details to others. And as Katya mentioned again, adults with ADHD can hyperfocus on their interests. So harder to pay attention for more mundane things, can focus deeply with more important things. So I was going to mention this kind of imbalance in attention that's really the crux of ADHD, not necessarily a deficit. There are many challenges to making the diagnosis in adulthood that I come across every day. One of the most formidable challenges is that just having attention problems as an adult doesn't mean that ADHD is the cause. And having attention problems as an adult is really, really common. Everyone has attention problems. It's part of being human. It's part of having a brain that's built on chemicals and electricity. And there are many conditions, maybe more so than in childhood, in adulthood that cause attention to worsen. Depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, sleep issues, alcohol use, marijuana use, etc. So the real key to diagnosis is how long have these problems been going on? Have they been lifelong since childhood? And are there other adult onset conditions that are playing a role? Okay, so simple, we can get that information right. Well, adult clients don't always have clear memories of childhood symptoms or childhood at all, for that matter. We can ask parents, but try asking a 7-year-old parent about how their 40-year-old was doing 30 years ago and see how well that works, how well they paid attention in the classroom, what their study habits were. What you'll find is most parents think that things were pretty much fine, and they may be right too. You can get school records, but many school records are pretty superficial. In large schools, especially, teachers may not notice when a kid is struggling. There may be a lot of informal accommodating, maybe at smaller schools. And parents often structure their kids' study habits at home, or they have a great executive skills coach, or maybe they had it, but probably not back in the 70s and 80s. But to the point where, kids have sports that they're doing, other activities really structure their time. Sometimes there's an older sibling who has more needs. And so comparatively, the client in question seem pretty typical. Anyway, all this is to say it's not that easy to establish criteria for ADHD in adulthood, and it's up to the clinician to get a sense of what was really going on then. So all that takes a lot of time, and there are some ways to be diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood, and these are them in order of quality from lowest to highest, in my humble opinion as a neuropsychologist. You can take a test online that involves like a single questionnaire or two questionnaires. You can tell a doctor that you're having attention problems. Depending on the doctor, you may wind up with an ADHD diagnosis. You can tell your psychiatrist your story, maybe take a questionnaire or two, have them diagnose ADHD in order to try stimulant medication, see if it helps you. You can work with a therapist who really gets to know you and your story, and they may diagnose ADHD. Or you can undergo a comprehensive neuropsych evaluation. You can do more than one of these things. You can do all of these things. But the most important part of the evaluation, as far as I'm concerned, is not the actual testing that we do in the office, like memory, executive functions. That can be helpful for understanding oneself and how somebody ticks. But the most important part is the gathering of information through interviews and questionnaires and maybe available records. And this is another way it kind of diverges from childhood ADHD, because in this case, you're really asking the client themselves and relying on them for reporting of their own symptoms. You don't get that in childhood. So, or maybe not as much, you don't rely on it. So I thought it might be helpful to take you through some examples of some questionnaire results. I use the CARS 2 to get at current adult symptoms. This is the first criterion of diagnosis. Are there current adult ADHD symptoms present? And we get at that by asking the client to rate their own symptoms and a collateral to rate the client's symptoms. So it could be a parent, a spouse, a best friend. For each of these examples, they were parents. And this questionnaire helps us to address one of the primary issues in adult assessment, which is that every adult has attention lapses. So we can put some numbers to those lapses, see just how pronounced they are compared to the general population. So the higher the bars are, the more problematic the rater sees the area. So this is a young adult client who had a very clear history of ADHD symptoms throughout her life. She never received a diagnosis. And what we see here is a significant level of inattention and executive dysfunction, a very elevated level of hyperactivity, less so for impulsivity, and then much less emotional dysregulation, which carries into adulthood, and the sort of negative self-concept that I'll talk more about later. But this is so common in adult ADHD that they put it on the scale to measure it. And then more DSM-specific criterion. And this is the mom's reports, a little lower, a little mostly a little higher with emotional dysregulation and negative self-concept. But the mom was very much on board with the idea of ADHD. So this is a good example of something that's really consistent across raters. Um, this is one I was really on the fence about in terms of diagnosing because the client's ratings for themselves were pretty borderline, and parents didn't report anything significant except emotional dysregulation and negative self-concept. But this is a good example of where context matters, and another kind of highlight for adult ADHD, with adults having so many different settings that they can and situations that they're in. So the client had just graduated college. They were living at home. They were looking for a job. There were very few demands on the client's cognitive functioning. So that has to be taken into account. The client was also extremely private, and the parents acknowledged that they knew very little about what was going on with him, even though they were living under the same roof. So these are reasons why it's really important to understand the client holistically, where they are in life, and where these ratings are really set in context. And here's another, which with huge discrepancies between the client and the mother. This client was already living outside of the home for a while. Mom had a lot of stressors going on in her own life. So it makes sense that mom wouldn't necessarily notice the struggles that her daughter was having internally. Um, so again, I show you these just to show you how we go about assessment in adults and how important it is to get those adult ratings in the context with which we're getting them. What else makes a ADHD assessment complicated? There are often incentives to seek an ADHD diagnosis, even when it's not accurate. So, a 2019 study showed that a substantial minority of adults being assessed for ADHD do exaggerate their problems. This is not something I think you see often in childhood. I think kids just kind of go about the testing and everything. But some adults want to enhance their performance at work with a stimulant medication, which will give you a boost whether you actually have ADHD or not. Some adults want academic accommodations at college or grad school. Some want workplace accommodations. All of that will help you whether you have ADHD or not. Some adults understandably just want a label to help explain any past and current and maybe future life difficulties. So it's hard for us as providers. We want to help people. We don't want to dismiss concerns. We certainly don't want to have any false negatives where we miss ADHD that's actually there after, possibly a lifetime of frustration and invalidation and maybe underachievement. But we also really want to take self-reports with some degree of caution. We do have controls in place. For example, the questionnaire, the CARS 2, can detect whether somebody's really kind of exaggerating their problems over reporting. We have measures of performance validity in our objective testing that can detect whether someone's maybe coming in and, you know, hanging back a little bit, trying to show us their problems, maybe just not trying very hard. So we do take a look at that. Some other issues in ADHD diagnosis in adulthood. ADHD is strongly associated with other psychiatric disorders, most commonly substance use disorder, mood disorder, anxiety disorder. As you can see, we don't have a very good grasp of how common these disorders are in adult ADHD. You can see a wide range of prevalence stats here. And research also shows that adult ADHD is associated with a range, as I mentioned before, of negative self-conceptual issues, frustration with oneself, reduced self-worth. And if you think about what kids with ADHD, the negative attention that Katja was talking about, just kind of internalizing that, especially when the ADHD is undiagnosed for so long, that can be especially challenging. So, but again, recall that these disorders are also associated with the same kind of cognitive difficulties seen in ADHD. So if someone comes in with a depressive disorder, mood disorder, they're going to have problems with attention and executive functioning, whether they have ADHD or not. So on our questionnaires, they may look like somebody with ADHD. On testing, they may look like somebody with ADHD. So the key to differential diagnosis is a comprehensive look again at the whole history of those symptoms, whether they were present in childhood. And, not to harp on this, but I think it's worthwhile to go back to the ways that people get diagnoses out there. And, I'm not trying to completely devalue services like this. I love the idea of efficiency, access, cost effectiveness. I think it's important to take a first step to self-exploration, but ADHD in adulthood can be a complicated diagnosis to make. It's very often not conducive to an online test. Just kind of rounding out the lifespan here, older adults with ADHD can show symptoms that are similar in younger people, but they don't see the symptoms as being problematic as they did in the past. For one, they've probably been highly practiced at their compensatory strategy over the course of decades. Uh, Old age also comes with a sense of acceptance. And older adults have fewer demands on their cognitive functioning, so they may not notice symptoms as much if they're retired, not raising kids. Um, they have a wider range of conditions that can mimic ADHD. So, for example, cerebrovascular changes are very common as we age, changes in the blood vessels of the brain, which affects the same systems as ADHD. So it gets even more complicated then. Whatever age-related cognitive changes occur can be more pronounced in people with a history of ADHD. Doctors have to be a little more careful in prescribing medication for ADHD in older adults. It can interact with medications already being taken. And again, there are also positives that come with ADHD in older adulthood. Uh, they're essentially more energetic and productive than those without, which is similar to what we see in younger adulthood. Just a couple. Oh, actually, I'm gonna skip this slide. Basically, just noting that stimulants are still the first line of treatment, just as in kids. But there are lower effect sizes seen in adults compared to children, so that they don't work quite as well as we see in children. Um, and then I wanted to talk about cognitive coaching strategies for adult ADHD for compensating. Obviously, very similar to what we see in childhood, but I very often recommend an executive skills coach, like the folks at the Study Pro. Providers, if you don't know, these are providers who help you implement certain systems and strategies for compensating for ADHD-like symptoms. Some of the strategies, similar to what Katja was saying about, clean your room, breaking down a larger problem into smaller pieces. This works for adults as well. This is something that every adult knows they should do, and nobody actually does. So I think it helps to, have a coach kind of take you through that and practice how to do that. Um, Time management is another good strategy, doing your most complex work at your best time of day, which for most people I think is the morning, saving the more mundane tasks for later in the day. For many people with ADHD, it's important to take regular breaks. Trying to sustain attention over time is much more difficult. Space management is important. So it's important to work in your optimal setting. And for some adults, that's complete silence. For some adults, that's, in a library, the low drone of a coffee shop. I like that personally, having music on. Um, and it's also important for people with ADHD to remember that humans are not good multitaskers. In fact, we're literally unable to multitask. When we think we're multitasking, we're just kind of shifting our attention back and forth. So no one should really try to multitask, but people with ADHD may be particularly vulnerable to its impact. And of course, using some organizational tool like a calendar. There are many productivity apps out there, one of which I swear by, which is called Things in its third edition. I use it constantly. No conflict of interest. I just love it. So you could check things like that out. I often recommend a standing or a walking desk, particularly if there are hyperactive symptoms, that kind of internal restlessness. And finally, some people find it helpful to work in the presence of somebody else who's also working. And there are actually websites out there where you can pull up some random person and have them work side by side with you over, over video conference. I haven't tried that myself, but so just some take-home messages. There is no adult ADHD. There's only ADHD in adulthood. Went through some common experiences, the same kind of cognitive difficulties we see or imbalances we see in childhood, but there are also some real world, adult consequences, often this negative self-concept that gets built up. And there are also the same strengths that you see in childhood, entrepreneurship, saying yes. From my perspective, a holistic, comprehensive assessment is most accurate and is really the most helpful. And there are a wide range of strategies to help manage symptoms, and an executive skills coach can help you with that. And so I will thank you for your sustained attention. I put up our contact information there. I guess I'll stop. Well, I'll leave it up here.
Yeah, go ahead and leave that
Questions.
while we're
Yeah.
asking questions. I first of all thank you both. That was extraordinary and took me through my entire family and parents, everybody that I know. My dog, I was thinking about my dog should just be able to know. Just kidding, Katia, on the should. We agree with the should. So what I wanted to, for Josie, answer the question that the calendar taskmaster tool you were talking about
Yeah.
was things.
It's called Things, and it's called Things 3 now because it's in its third
Things
edition.
three.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And
I think there are
so
many
maybe,
good ones out there. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe Destiny in the background can try to find a link to App
Yeah,
Store or something,
sure.
but it's called Things 3. And there was a couple questions we definitely want to answer. So I know that you just reiterated the answer to the question, is it possible to develop ADHD in adulthood that you didn't have in childhood, which you just reiterated. However, there was a follow-up. If not, then what are some of the other disorders presenting as ADHD?
Yeah, I mean, I listed a few, but very often it is some sort of mood disorder, depression, anxiety. Very often it's sleep or sleep apnea is one that kind of gets kind of tossed
Mm,
aside. If you're a snorer, getting that checked out could help. People say that CPAP treatment is just miraculous, changes their lives. But not to harp on sleep apnea, but there's just such a range. Stress itself, so if you notice the onset of new attention symptoms that you just don't remember from childhood, it's very likely that this is not ADHD and something else. But that's why it
mm.
takes, a real, long interview to kind of go through all that stuff.
jbrand@stixrud.com is what my suggestion is. And then we have another, I'm going to put two questions. Michelle, I'm going to put your two questions together. So first of all, she said, thank you for all the wonderful information you're sharing. So they have a 23-year-old who just graduated from college, was diagnosed with ADHD just a couple of years ago. And I know you mentioned executive functioning support, but do you have any specific examples for adult level executive functioning, or I don't know if you want to share them out loud, career coaching, medication in Northern Virginia?
For a college age,
Post college, I
post
guess
college.
graduated from college a couple of
Yeah.
years ago. Yeah, we do up through college. So
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, I was gonna say, why not you guys? I wasn't sure about
Yeah.
your outside. Yeah, I mean, my favorite in the area is called Life Solved Coaching. I know Justine Ruotolo. It's a tough name to pronounce and spell, but I think it's Ruotuolo. I know she's in Virginia, and we think very highly of her. Those are a couple coaches that come to mind and that I do work in Virginia.
Okay. So you're calling it Life Solve
Life solved.
Coaching.
Hmm.
And then, and I know Dusty will try to find it. Justine, RUO.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay,
Something,
It's
yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you,
Ruotolo.
Dr. Okay. And
Right.
then there was another question about school. So, and maybe this might go to you, Dr. Fredriksen, which is more about the teenager with ADHD, and they are working with Study Pro, but conflicted about how much, and we get this asked often, how much should I share with the school, not share with the school? What would you say about that?
I mean,
What,
do you mean in terms of the diagnosis, the child's needs, etc.?
yeah, conflicted on how much information the school should have. I think sometimes people are concerned, and I want to speak for you, Michelle, about, there would be a negative effect on them, or how much can they really even help beyond the kind of work that we may be doing with their student, or they might be getting support from
I mean,
outside.
I tend to advocate for openness. Um, and part of the reason for that is just practically speaking, many students with ADHD really benefit from accommodations. And again, thinking about setting them up for success with that transition to the post-secondary, we want to set them up with accommodations for college as well. And so, just
Mhm.
practically speaking, we need to be open in order to obtain those things. I mean, the just some of those so basic things like a teacher being mindful of where the child sits in the classroom, help breaking down like longer term assignments with teacher check-ins, extended time for testing. These things can make such a radical difference in a student's
Mhm.
experience. Also, uh, I think, it sort of speaks to our underlying feeling about the diagnosis as well, like in the sense of, um, like we wouldn't keep it from the school if our kid had diabetes and needed, do you know what I mean? Like I see
Mhm.
this as a medical condition. Our child is legally, they should legally have access
Entitled,
to certain,
sure.
yeah, entitled. Thank you. I was trying to think of the right
Mm.
word there. Yeah. And so sharing that I think is important and it helps our child also begin to self-advocate. So I tend to be in favor of more openness rather than less for a number of reasons, and those are some of them.
And then as things move into, upper high school and college, there may be interest by the family to get accommodations on the SAT or other testing
Absolutely.
too. So all of that, having that history to be able to
Mhm.
have that would be helpful. Um, Michelle, I hope that helped. And of course, we're happy to talk to you more after this webinar if you wanted to set a call. And then
Jesse, do
there was
you
a,
have something at
oh,
10? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Oh
because
no,
I
oh,
don't.
no,
10:15. Oh
Oh, and
yeah.
I was going to
yeah,
say, I don't. Like, I'm happy to hang out. So
Yeah.
just,
Yeah, it's
okay.
fine.
okay, go ahead. I'm not in a
Okay.
rush.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you,
we
Katja.
we did have I was keeping an eye on the clock. We did have one more question for the last minute here. What are
Sure.
some strategies for supporting a teen who's resistant to school accommodations and executive function coaching? I'll let you guys take that, and I'm happy
Ooh,
to add
that's a
something
tough
at the
one,
end
right?
too. But
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear your thought on that. That's a tough one. Um, I mean, really, it's that scaffolding piece. Like you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that can be so
Mhm.
frustrating as a parent when you, with the advantage of your years of education and the things you've gone through and the reading you've done and all this stuff, when you know something would make your child's life easier, but they are unwilling for whatever reason it is to accept the thing. It's intensely sort of frustrating and distressing. And so so many parents bring this sort of concern. I mean, I think the only thing we can do is present the information, especially if there's some scientific, like, you know, we can't just tell them this is best for you, go and do it. Like, I mean, some kids you can, and that's fine. But for kids who are questioning, show them the data, like show them the find
Mhm.
articles, like have a discussion, have them talk to a professional. Like I often do, I always, with teenagers, do student feedbacks at the end of an evaluation to walk them through their profile and why I've made certain recommendations, etc. Like present them with the
Mhm.
information. And then, I mean, again, you can't, It's the same with kids who you really think would benefit from psychotherapy but are just unwilling to engage. They're just not at that
Hmm.
point, and you really can't force it. I
Yeah.
tend to present accommodations when I talk to teenagers who are reluctant about it. I tend to say, hey, I'm going to write this up. We should get this plan in place, and then you use it as needed. No one is going to drag you out by the ear to have extended time in another room, right? This is here for you. So we want to try to put the control back in their court so they feel empowered to make the choices for themselves. But here, I'm just making sure you have access to this, should you wish to choose it, right? Your mission,
Hmm.
should you choose to accept it, wasn't it? Right? So that sort of tends to be my approach.
I do want to pause here for one moment and say for everybody, if you do have to go, we're recognizing it's 10 o'clock. I always like, as an executive function center, to feel that I'm being very cognizant of the time. However, Dr. Brand and Dr. Fredriksen are willing to answer some of these other questions. So thank you very much. If you do have to leave, we are going to record this and send the recording. And if you don't, hang out because we have a couple more um, questions to answer. So Dr. Brand, did you want to add to that or?
No, I think I don't have anything to add
Okay.
there. Yeah, yeah.
And also, Robin, I mean, I'm happy to answer questions because we get these questions all the time because people, kids are very, very nervous about coming, for example, to Study Pro because I think it's the need behind the behavior. So what's really going on? They're feeling less than. I know a lot of times students will come here feeling that because they have a lot of missing work or just because they feel that they need help, even if they're doing exceptionally well, but maybe even taking too long to get work done, that means that there's something wrong with them. And I think when we meet them and they feel very confident that we believe that they have the goal, that we know how hard they're working, that there are other strategies. Oftentimes we use analogies if they play sports. We know that when you have a coach in basketball or in field hockey, oftentimes we know that that coach, can be a huge supporter and just help with different strategies, right? That's why we have people that allow us to find easier and better and more efficient ways of doing things. It doesn't mean you're broken, right? So we always say be curious and don't convince, and it's a much longer conversation and it's better to really understand the specifics of your child. But I would say that a lot of times if it's presented as an ultimatum or a punishment that you should come here, it really does make it challenging. And at the same time, we also have to remember that 30% lower executive function that was presented is the brain they're using to make these decisions, right? We're using an emotional brain to say, I don't need the help. But we as adults know that there is some challenges and there is some friction. And so that's really kind of the rub. So I'll stop at that and kind of move on to some other questions. So there was some question about, can we get some tips on talking to a young teen about their diagnosis?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so my approach tends to be couple things. Number one, use their words. So, say they have described certain difficulties. So, very often when I'm talking to kids, I'll say, remember how you said that it's hard to pay attention in math because you don't really like math? Well, guess what? So tying it into their own experience. Right? Or I heard from your coach that blah, blah. So tying it into their own experience or the experience a trusted adult has makes it feel real, I think. I do very much my feedback style is with kids is like a three-pronged approach. I do strengths, interpersonal, testing, interests, whatever, the full gamut. Um, Everybody has some harder stuff, right? Everything doesn't come equally to everybody. All brains are different. Here are the things that the testing shows or that your teacher says or blah, blah are harder for you. And guess what that maps onto, right? So using that in conjunction with their own words to say, and this is what ADHD means, right? You are super, super passionate when you're building your Star Wars Legos, and that's possibly because of your ADHD. I mean, there's real strengths associated with this, but when it's time to do your reading homework, whatever. And so you sort of explain what that means. I like to bring in a little, guess what? Did you know that Ariana Grande, which is true, has ADHD? Did you know that Simone Biles has ADHD? Did you know that Michael? So, I mean, I think it really helps kids too if there's like a celebrity or do you know what I mean? Some kind of famous person they can sort of pin their wagon to, right? And then my
Mhm.
last prong is here's what we're going to do about it. So, again, same with the evaluation process. The last piece is we got this. Like, here's the plan. At school, we're going to do this. At home, we're going to do this. And so kids are sent on their way with this idea that this is all manageable. We have it in hand. Like, we're going to just sort of, right? That tends to be my approach.
Mhm.
I
Go on,
would
Dr.
I would
Fran.
just say, I mean, it's very different in adults, but probably mostly in adults, I'm having to explain to parents of young adults, what what this means. Why was this missed? I think it's important for parents to understand because they feel badly when there's
Mhm.
a late diagnosis. Say, look, this is why it was missed because of very, very smart, right? Was
Mhm.
able to mask, compensate. So so more often I'm having to either talk to the parents or a spouse to explain
Mhm.
the diagnosis rather than the client who came in looking for it because they really suspected it. So it's
Yeah.
less of a surprise.
Mm.
And the word that we often use here is relief. I mean, I think a lot of times we don't know what's wrong with us. My own son, who was diagnosed at the Stixrud Group, when he got the second diagnosis after ADHD of autism, he was so relieved, and he said, "You think ADHD can do all this?" And it's something that was such an incredible relief for him. And I only
Yeah.
put that out there is because sometimes I think we feel there's shame or blame associated with it, but it's again to your point of diabetes. Well, maybe that's why, or something. That's why maybe, oh, that's why I'm so tired all the time. I'm not crazy, right? And so I
Mhm.
think oftentimes it is really important to think of that, which goes to another point that a teacher was saying here to the earlier question. I am a teacher, and it's immensely helpful to know about diagnoses. Teachers also have trouble telling the difference between can and won't, and knowing there's a reason helps us understand when it is can't. And I really appreciate that for the
Mm.
anonymous attendee. So thank you
That's an
for
excellent
sharing
point.
that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so important. Teachers spend so much time with our kids. Wouldn't we want them to know?
Yeah.
Because I worry otherwise that there can be negative attributions about behavior, right, that are not fair or accurate because the teacher just doesn't know.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a
I
question
I
about,
do have
oh,
to,
sorry.
I'm sorry, I do
Yeah,
have to
go ahead.
step
No,
out now
please,
because, yeah,
please,
but thank
Dr.
you so
Brand. Yeah.
much.
Okay.
Have a
Well,
good
we're
Great. Take
day.
care. Thanks, everyone.
yes, thank you
I'll
so
Goodbye.
stop
much.
sharing
Thank
here.
you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
And then we'll have one more question here, Dr. Fredriksen. So,
No worries. I'm not in a rush.
um, what's your recommendation for a late high school student who doesn't want an EF coach? They know it'd be good to use a calendar, but can't keep it up. Do you recommend setting aside a time to always practice using the calendar? They just don't keep it up. I know that's a little bit tougher one, a
Oh,
little more specific.
tricky, isn't it? I mean, just so maybe it's not the right calendar. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many things that could be going on. Like, some people really they need something on paper. Some people really need an
Mhm.
app, and there's so many good apps out there. And you can just easily like on Chad or understood.org, or there's all these websites where you can find sort of good recommendations. So it may be that it's not the right sort of system that's in place. It may be that, as you say, they need to set like a timer. Like, let's all these devices that our children are unfortunately sort of, stuck on. Let's use their power for good, right? I mean, so that it could be that they, so at, whatever, 5 p.m. every day, your little ding 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 is going to go off, and it means it's time to check yeah, absolutely. Like a cue of that nature could be helpful. It could be that they need to, you want to bring in very often. I mean, at this age, kids are not just psychosocial changes in development, right? Their brains are not primed to listen to feedback from their parents, right?
Mhm.
So it could be that you have them work with a coach or someone for a period of time just to help them learn strategies that they then can independently implement, right? So there are lots of different things that could end up being at the root and or being productive. And then also when they're working with someone outside the home, it detangles the situation from the natural parent-child sort of stuff. Well, you're telling me to
Mhm.
check my calendar, but we argued at breakfast this morning because my shirt, was too short and my belly was showing, and you made me go and change, and I'm mad with you. And so that just happened with me and my
Mhm.
daughter the other day. I'm mad with you, and I don't want to now listen to you. Do you know what I mean? So it just
Yeah.
divorces it from those sorts of stressors. So those are things to think about. If there's anything
Yeah.
more specific that you want to share, I can also talk more about.
No, I think what I would say is we're doing a whole presentation on when kids get stuck, what maybe you can do, like how can you be curious and not convinced? How can you see that need behind the behavior? I love where you're going with that, Dr. Fredrickson, in terms of we jump to the solution that this is the calendar, right? We had this conversation the other day, right? This is the calendar. And
Mhm.
so sometimes it really is being curious about meeting them where they are and what can they implement that can work for them at that time. So the presentation that we're doing at for FCPS on March 11th, Mabel, if you wanted to, we can send that link out when we send this recording. And for people who want to come, that will give some other ideas. It's very focused on things like that. So that might help. And then I guess a little bit of a homework assignment or we'll request for you as we're closing, Dr. Fredriksen. There's a question about book recommendations for 18 to 22-year-olds. I know that may be Dr. Brand's, but if
Oh,
you or Dr. Brand want to get
yeah.
together on
We
that,
we'd be happy to send a list to you to disseminate. Yeah, absolutely.
okay,
And
yeah,
I we'll just send like a lifespan list, okay?
okay,
So there's
that would be
anybody who
great.
wants like younger kid
Okay,
books
and
or adult books or whatever.
we'll send that out to everybody. So we
Yeah.
still have quite a group here, and we wanted to thank you both. Obviously, this was a topic we're going to have you back every year.
Oh,
Um,
I love it. It's such fun to
yeah,
talk about and so relevant to all of us,
so relevant because everybody we know, right? It's just it's a prevalent challenge, and it's very there's a lot. It's very complex. And there's a lot going on. So we extraordinarily appreciate your expertise and for staying on for a little bit longer. And thank you everybody for coming. And we will see you hopefully next month with our webinar from the Anxiety Institute or at FCPS. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for having
And
us.
okay, enjoy your day, everyone. Bye bye.
Take care.